All right, welcome to chapter 6 of nutrition. We will be going over the fats today. I know this is one of the tastier chapters that we go over, and again, it's one of the ones we go, oh man, don't get too much of that. But anyways, here we go. Let's get started. Let me share the screen. All right. So chapter 6, fats. All right, so we classify fats according to their chemical composition. We will distinguish between saturated, unsaturated, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, CIS or cis, and trans fats. And then we will also talk about the omegas 3, 6, and 9 fatty acids and what they do. We'll talk about how you digest, absorb, transport, and store fat, explain metabolism of fat, including mobilization, transportation, uptake, translocation, and oxidation, and explain ketosis and the effects it may have on training. We'll talk about how the body uses fat to fuel exercise, state fact recommendations for athletes, calculate the amount of fat needed daily, identify sources of dietary fat, assess an athlete's dietary fat intake, and evaluate dietary supplements related to fat metabolism. Okay. So the word fat has many different meanings. Again, a lot of times it gets put in a context of negativity, because we're all, for the most part, always trying to avoid gaining more sub-Q fat, right? There's most people would rather have a little bit of fat on their body, not a lot of bit of fat, right? So we're always fighting with that. So again, it gets a negative connotation, but at the same time, when we think about dietary fat intake, we have to have it. That we need fat, and we actually have to have a certain amount of fat on our bodies for good health. But again, a lot of things get thrown out there. What can be stored as fat, how easily things are stored as fat, and so on and so forth. And so hopefully going through these chapters, we'll debunk some of those myths. It is an important source of energy at rest and during low intensity exercise. Most concentrated source of energy. So this is the good and bad about fat. You get 9 kilocalories per gram. Good thing is you get a lot more calories per gram than you do proteins or carbs. In fact, you get more than double that. The bad news is you get more than double that. So depending on if you're trying to control the amount of calories coming in versus your calories going out, that can make an issue if you like foods that are high in fat and you tend to eat higher fatty foods. You may be eating a lot more calories than what you would get from carbohydrates or proteins. And again, we talked about with proteins, we don't usually use proteins as an energy source. They usually get used as other things, right? Where fats, depending on what they are, some will go to certain things in your body. Other things, again, will go to energy. Drinking my coffee. Talking about things that will metabolize fat. Just kidding. All right. Certain fats and foods in the blood are associated with cardiovascular disease. All right. So you want to know the amounts and types of dietary fats that are in the foods that you eat. Okay. So fatty acids, there's chains of carbon and hydrogen all put together. Remember, fats and carbs, a lot of times when you look at them, the makeups are more similar than that of protein, because protein has the amine group and the nitrogen, where fatty acids and carbohydrates have carbon, a lot of carbon and hydrogen with them. Okay. The chain length varies from 4 to 24 carbs, or carbons, excuse me, even numbers only. Right? Double bonds are distinguishing factors. We'll talk about the different types of fats with saturated, unsaturated, polyunsaturated, trans fats, and all that. Formation of the double bond is also a distinguishing factor, and fatty acid series is distinguishing factors as well. Okay. So this is what an oleic acid would look like when you're looking at it. So you can see the bonds and the cis double bond in the oleic acid. So again, you can look at the difference between palmitic, oleic, and linoleic acid, right? So these are the different omega acids between the oleic and linoleic acid that people tend to try to figure out which they want more of. Oxygen, hydrogen, carbon, the different bonds. Again, same makeup as carbohydrates, different sequences, and there's a lot more hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen in there than what you would see with the carbohydrate. And again, you know, these have more similarity in that regard versus both of their similarities with protein. Vegetable oils are an excellent source of monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids. Again, that's why, you know, when you hear a lot of times, you know, try to keep your saturated fats low, your unsaturated fats are the ones that you want to shoot for, and even then you don't want to have too much of it. But the oils have a lot better benefits in comparison than the saturated. And again, you still want to think moderation and go with the recommendations of how much oil that you put in your foods. Okay. So this is just a picture of the difference between a cis or CIS double bond and a trans double bond. All right. And again, this is what will distinguish what a trans fat is versus when you see the double bonds of a CIS or cis. Okay. There's the eicosapentaenoic acid, which I can never say. See the linoleic acid and the oleic acid. Again, here's more pictures of those same triglycerides that we saw earlier. All right, so fatty acid distribution in certain foods. You see the blue is saturated. I believe that is red is monounsaturated in these colored charts for colorblind person, and then green is the polyunsaturated. Okay. So again, when we tell people to watch their saturated fat intake, you will notice coconut oil, which right now is it's kind of a fad, you know, like high fashion food, I guess is how, you know, everybody's like, oh, cook it in coconut oil, it's good. There is some health benefits with coconut oil. For the most part, what you read is highly over exaggerated. But yeah, if you look at it, coconut oil in general just has a lot of calories. So when you're trying to watch your calories, it doesn't matter that there's some healthy benefits in there. There's a lot of calories. But again, there's a lot of saturated fat in there. And if you're always cooking in coconut oil, like some people I know do, because it's become this, I don't know, this big fad with doing that, all that saturated fat is going to have some health effects later on if you continue to always cook in it, okay? Versus if you look over at the olive oil and safflower oil and all those, a lot less saturated fat, okay? And again, they've got more monounsaturated and polyunsaturated, which is what you're looking for, right? Again, you'll notice the ones that have more saturated fat in general tend to be your solid fats, which again, what that means is they're solid at room temperature versus the oils. And again, these are not the fats that we tend to want to eat a whole lot of. Now, again, calorie to calorie, you know, it doesn't matter if it's saturated versus unsaturated. You know, 9 kilocalories per gram is that. But when you're looking at other health benefits and detriments, we want to stick mostly to the unsaturated fats versus the saturated. Okay. distinguishing between sterols and phospholipids. Sterols have a ring structure, so cholesterol, vitamin D, sex hormones are all part of the sterols group. Cholesterol is only found in animal foods, and it's also manufactured in your body. You actually don't need to ingest cholesterol. Your body makes all the cholesterol it needs. Again, the other thing is with cholesterol is some of the animal food products that you eat may affect your cholesterol and some may not. And again, the other thing that plays into that is your DNA. So again, you've seen maybe some different research on eggs. You know, some people will eat lots of eggs. It doesn't affect your cholesterol at all. Other folks may be somewhat affected by that. In general, know that cholesterol in eggs does not affect most people, but again, it's a case-by-case basis. All of us have different DNA and genetics, and that plays into how that affects us. So again, if you have certain foods that raise your bad cholesterol, then you know, you just need to work with the nutritionist and the doctor and figure out what those are. If you don't have any effects with that, then you know, and it's not an issue for you. Okay. Phospholipids are similar in structure to triglycerides. They contain phosphate and it's a component of cell membranes. So here's what a sterols would look like. Okay. My dog keeps licking my feet. Cholesterol is only found in animal foods. So there's different products where you'll find cholesterol. Okay, so fats and performance and health. So from a performance perspective, fat provides energy at rest and during low intensity exercise. So if you do a lot of training with low intensity exercise, you might find a good use for fats. And again, it's also a good, you need to have enough of it so that you can spare your carbohydrate usage during rest, right? Because again, if you're a high intense exerciser or athlete, during rest, if you don't take in enough fats, then you're going to constantly be burning a lot more carbs than you need to, because your body's not going to want to take all the storage of fat that you have, right? So if you cut fats completely out of your diet, that can be detrimental to your training, right? Now, when you don't have free-floating fats to use, you will release them from storage in your adipose tissue. You also store them in your muscles. So again, this the fat that's in your muscles isn't something that shows up as like you look fat or anything like that. You actually want that in there because that's a good place for that to be stored for exercise usage. The adipose tissue, again, you know, we usually look at it, oh man, that's a bad thing, but you have to have some of it in there, right? There's too low if you don't have enough of that, right? So again, original source from food, we get it either in saturated versus unsaturated. So from a health perspective, intake of certain fats can reduce heart disease. So omega-3 fatty acids are one of those. You know, again, it's when you're looking at fats to intake, looking at, you know, trying to get your omega-3s. Now, again, usually when you find foods that have omega-3, they'll have omega-3 and omega-6 in conjunction with each other, and that's trying to make sure you have that in your diet. It is a good thing. So there's some, you know, these are what most people will term the good fats, so to speak. And again, intake of certain fats can increase heart disease risk. So taking in high amounts of saturated fatty acids can increase heart disease. Getting too much dietary cholesterol, and especially if your body is sensitive to using that cholesterol, can put you at heart disease. And you see they put there in some people. Again, it's a genetic thing, so it's not the same for all people. Okay, and athletes need to balance both. So again, you can't get all just omegas. You know, and a lot of foods that are good for you in some regards are going to have some saturated and some other unsaturated fats. So, you know, having a good balance and just kind of staying within certain guidelines is your best perspective. Cutting any of them completely out is not a good, healthy approach. Right? So digestion of fats. So small intestine, we use pancreatic lipase and monoglycerides. Again, depending on how many fats you get in there, it can increase and decrease your gastric emptying rates. The other thing about fats is they tend to give you satiety. So high fatty foods tend to fill you up with more quickly. Again, there's a lot more energy as well. Right? So absorption of fats. So they enter the mucosal cells through a passive diffusion. Majority are reassembled into triglycerides, 16 or 18 carbon fatty acids. They're incorporated into chylomicrons and lipoprotein, and 14 carbon fatty acids pass through mucosal cells unchanged. The triglycerides are slowly released into your lymphatic system. So again, instead of going straight into the blood system like carbs and proteins do, these transport the lymph system first. Other fatty acids are then released into the blood through the portal vein, through the going to the liver. Blood fatty acid concentration is increased for several hours. Again, just as we can measure blood sugar, we can also measure the amount of fat that's in your blood system. Cellular triglyceride absorption, adipose and muscle cells are important storage sites. Again, you got to store some of it. I'm going to keep saying that because I know, we get this. Everybody's trying to get down to like these ridiculous amounts of body fat percentage. There are health detriments that happen when you get below. Okay, lipoprotein lipase will stimulate the release of fatty acids from your triglycerides. So fat storage, lipoprotein lipase activity is stimulated by insulin. Fatty acids are reassembled into adipose and muscle cells. So again, we talked about insulin earlier in the carbs, right? So when you have a lot of glucose in your bloodstream, it can activate insulin. Right? So to do that, cells then uptake a lot of carbohydrates to help lower the amount of sugar, so to speak, in the blood. When that happens, lipoprotein lipase will then be activated so that we're not flooding as much fatty acids into the bloodstream, but then trying to, hey, let's hold on to these and we'll store these at this time because we need to utilize the glucose that's in there, okay? Again, that's, you get some weird myths that come around from that where it says, like when you eat carbs, this is one of the things where people think, well, when you eat carbs, you store more fat, and then somehow that's even gone, which is somewhat true. I mean, there's a little bit of truth in that, but again, it also has to determine, how much calories you're taking in and whether you're spending things. But somehow that's also mythed into when your insulin spikes, somehow that takes the carbohydrates and now you're storing the carbohydrates as fat, which I've seen a lot of people try to make that weird quantum leap, which is not true at all. Okay? So they are reassembled in adipose and muscle cells in sub-Q and visceral fat. Out of the two, the visceral fat's not one that you necessarily can see, but that is the more dangerous one. That's the one that stores in between your major organs and can cause problems, major health problems, more actually worse than what the sub-Q fat will do. You store it in slow twitch skeletal muscle. The reason that for a lot of you that will make sense because when you do long, slow distance type exercise, and you're doing it at low intensity, those are the muscles that are mostly activated because they're your more highly oxidative muscles, right? So this is, when we talk about the mitochondria and using the Krebs cycle and all those things, those are your muscles that have a lot of mitochondria. So these are oxidative muscles, and when we try to burn fat, we burn fat oxidatively, right? And it's also used in the heart muscles, right? Advantages, again, twice the amount of energy that you get from carbs and protein, and it's anhydrous, right? So again, the immobilize and transport of stored fats and triglycerides. this picture kind of talks about what we were talking about before, how glycerol will enter your bloodstream and uptake through there. Again, you guys, we're going to kind of go through this a little bit quicker because we're not going to get in deep detail on this in this particular chapter. All right. Again, here's more of the uptake. We'll go through these slides in a later portion. All right. So let's talk about ketosis. This is kind of a hot button subject as of last, like, I don't know, like maybe years or so. And actually, it's been around longer. The keto diet is basically the same as what the old Atkins diet was. Just Atkins diet's been redone and rebranded. Keto is now its thing. I'm sure at some point it'll be called something else. It keeps kind of resurfacing, recirculating under new brand names, right? So when you don't properly break down fat molecules, we get ketone bodies, right? Normal metabolic pathway, you have 2 to 6% of the body's energy is needed over overnight fast. The pathway is sometimes emphasized starvation state. A lot of times when you're not getting enough of certain foods, or you're not getting enough of any foods, you will break down ketones for energy. So again, when we have low carb intake, we will break down ketones. Or if you have impaired carbohydrate metabolism, such as in diabetes, you'll break down ketones. Now, here's the dangerous part of it. Again, whether you're diabetic, now again, this is one of the things as a diabetic, they tell them, like, be careful, you don't want to get into ketoacidosis. You can result in permanent harm and damage to the body, which part of that consists in death. Right? Now, getting into ketosis is one thing, but when you're constantly doing that, and if you get too dangerous of low levels, yes, those of you that are not diabetic can still get into ketoacidosis, right? And so again, this is something that it's not, it's not something that I ever recommend to folks. Again, if you want to do a keto diet, that's up to you. I'm sure, there's a lot of folks who have done it, and they know how to monitor things and do things somewhat healthy and all that, but it's not one that I would recommend to anybody, right? So during low carb intake and starvation, ketones are the source of energy for the brain because your body likes to use carbohydrates, right? Your brain uses carbohydrates. So now that you're starving it of carbohydrates because you decide not to take in, we've now got to break down the ketones, right? It's not that ketones are the preferred source of energy, as you might see on somebody's keto page, okay? Muscle glycogen is also depleted, which means that you've got to find other sources, which means now we got to do a lot of gluconeogenesis with proteins and fats. And again, where do we pull those proteins from? The muscle. Why? So that the muscle can then have energy. So you're not pulling amino acids out, from the muscle that it was using for other things, and now converting it and sending it back for energy because the muscle glycogen is now depleted, right? And because of that, we lose skeletal muscle, right? So when you got this weight loss going on, we're not just losing fat. So yes, there's some fat loss, as it says right there, but you're also losing skeletal muscle, which is not a good thing. And the thing is you can't dictate in your body one over the other when you're in a low carbohydrate issue. So a lot of that weight that you're losing, or not a lot, but in combination with all the weight that you're losing, you're losing fat, yes, but you're also losing skeletal muscle, which is not a good thing. Okay, and it is not beneficial for athletic performance by any means. So use of fat during exercise, the advantages, it's abundant in food supplies. It is energy dense, substantial storage in adipose tissue, so we can store it and store a lot of it. It produces large amounts of ATP. The disadvantage is it takes time to transport, metabolize, and you have to have oxygen to metabolize it and rephosphorylate it. Okay? Energy expenditure and fuel utilization during running can be measured. So again, you got to understand how this works. A lot of people think when you do long distance running, cycling, or swimming, you're just burning fat, right? Then you'll see fat burning mode on your treadmills and ellipticals and things like that. The way this works is not that simple, but as long as you're doing long distance stuff, you're burning fat, right? So what's going to determine that is your RER, right? So we talk about RER in the carbohydrates chapter, okay? So depending on if you are exchanging oxygen at a high rate, or if you look at it this way, because you don't really measure that, are you running really hard? So we're going to pick on running because that's the sport, or not sport, but I mean that's one of the forms of training that I do daily. If I run, which I'm going to run, I've been running 45 miles each day during this coronavirus thing. So let's say today I'm doing my 4-mile run. Okay, now if I go at what I call a cruising speed, okay, so I have a lower RER, right? So around 7%, so to speak. So I'm at a 0.7 of my RER, respiratory exchange rate. That what'll happen is I will, because I train a lot in this regard, my body will kind of, like it won't tax out my phosphoprotein system or my anaerobic and anaerobic glycogen systems, because I'm going at a slower speed. It'll kind of move those systems a bit faster, just because my body is used to doing this and knows how to, like you think about it, it's sort of like shifting through gears in a car. It'll shift through those at a much faster rate because my body's trained to do that. I can start burning fat as a fuel source at a much earlier rate. Now, again, if this is my first time running, not going to happen. I'm going to be burning mostly carbohydrates through that, and I'm going to feel really taxed at the end of that run. Okay? Now, if I increase my RER, so if I'm running really, really high intense, right? So if I'm running 4 miles and I'm trying to go at the fastest time I absolutely can, I'm not going to be burning mostly fat. I'm going to be burning mostly carbohydrates through that, because again, more readily available. The body easily uses that, even oxidatively, versus the fats. Okay, so I'll go through the anaerobic, and really tax those out more on the carbohydrate side, the glucose side, versus the fat side. Okay, so again, you got to understand like how you get into these energy systems, how these systems are used. And again, one of the things if you're really wanting to utilize fat as a source during not doing maximal exercise things, but submax training, for long distances and things like that. You've got to be going at a rate that your body can absolutely handle fairly easily, I guess, to an extent. And you've got to train so that it happens, like it'll happen early in the run. Now, again, some people take that information and then they misgive what I'm saying and think, oh, well, if I want to get more body fat off of me, I need to run slower and just train that way. That is absolutely not what I'm saying, because at the end of the day, the more energy you expend, the bigger the calorie deficit. So, if I expend more energy through higher intense or high intense cardio versus a low intense, and so I have a better calorie deficit at the end of the day, there's going to be more fat utilized and burned during times of rest through the 24-hour period, versus if I just do a short, so say I do my 4-mile run and I do it slow, I'm not going to burn as much energy as if I do my 4-mile run and really push myself. Okay? Now, again, the advantage of doing a slower run is, instead of doing 4, I might make 6 miles or 7 or 8 or whatever else. So maybe I might get more mileage, but again, I'm going to go for a longer period of time. So again, you look at, okay, what's the time spent doing those things? And that makes a difference as well. Okay, so now when we look at pound for pound, if I'm going to do a 30-minute workout and I can either run long distance for 30 minutes or I can do high intensity interval training for 30 minutes, and at the end of both of those, the high intensity interval training, I will burn more calories over time. That's where I'm going to see the change in my body more when it comes to the amount of fat percentage that I lose off of my body. Okay, so you need to understand that, because a lot of this gets misconstrued, and when I explain these things, I try to make sure that none of that gets misconstrued. All right, so then we have the absolute, which is total amount of energy that's expended, and then the rate is the number of calories expended each minute. So again, that goes into that, right? So you will expend more calories the harder you work. So at a higher RER, you expend more calories than at a lower RER. The lower RER, though, you'll be burning more fat as you fuel source versus the higher RER where you're using more carbohydrates. Okay. So again, this gives you an idea of energy expenditure and fuel utilization. So let's just look at the, if you look at rest, an RER of 0.77, heartbeats at 72, percentage of energy from fat is 78.2%. And again, this is, this is an estimation. Total energy expended, kilocalories per minute is 1.4. Now let's go down to the run at 9.3. You see the RERs going up at 0.8. You see percentage of fat going down, percentage of carbohydrates going up. Now again, at that run pace, this is, at 9:30, for a lot of people, that's a really slow run. For me, that's a really slow run pace. Now again, when I first started that, yeah, I'll see that, but my respiratory exchange rate, or ratio, however you want to say it, is going to be different than somebody else because of the training I do, right? So personally, my percentage of energy from fat might be higher at a 9:30 pace because my RER is actually lower, and my carbohydrate, or my energy from fat will be higher, my carbohydrate energy will be lower. Now again, what I want you to get is the gist of what happens. So this person decides to go faster, right? So they're going from 9:30, they're going to cut a minute and a half off, okay? So their energy, the respiratory exchange ratio or rate will go from 0.88 to 0.92, right? So they're getting closer to that 1 or 100%, like if you look at these as percentages. You'll see the fat drop from 40 to 27, and you're going to see the energy increase from carbohydrates from 59.2 to 72.8, right? So that's really what that's showing you, is that at higher effort or higher intensity, we use more carbohydrates. So again, when you think of a marathon runner, when they're doing really slow paced runs, they're going to have a lower RER, and yes, they're going to be burning more fat during those workouts. But if you ever watch a marathon, especially like a really good marathon runner, man, those guys and girls, when they run 26.2, they're not playing, right? They ain't playing. They're giving it all they got. So you're looking at, they've got a very high respiratory exchange rate for 26.2 miles. That's some carbohydrate burning much greater than fat burning, okay? Again, there's this misconception that, a lot of folks are like, oh yeah, you gotta go keto because you're a long distance runner. No, you need your carbohydrates, right? If you want to perform well, especially during races, okay? And if you look at the total energy expenditure from 11.5 at 9:30, you got a 15.3 at 8, and that's kilocalories per minute. So depending on how many minutes you go, you can see, after 2 minutes, we've only got 23 versus, 30, you're almost near 31 kilocalories after 2 minutes versus the 23, right? And it's going to exponentially go up and up and up. You're going to see a larger difference. So after 30 minutes, you burn a lot more calories at the faster rate than at the slower rate. Okay, so to equal the same amount of calories and burning more fat at that time, you'd have to go for a much longer running period. right? So this shows exercise intensity and relative fat and carbohydrate oxidation. And again, this just shows you that, you know, at percentage of VO2 max, you know, the higher you go, the more carbohydrates you use, versus the fats. At a lower VO2 max, you can utilize more fats. So again, your effort is going to determine your fuel source. Okay, and again, the type of training you do and the amount of training you do will play into that as well. And exercise intensity based on running speed, carbohydrates, right? The faster you go, more energy expended, you got to use carbohydrates because it's just easier for your body to do that. So what happens if you don't take in carbs? You can't give as much energy expenditure. That's what's going to happen. Your intensity will not match that of when you're well fueled with a good amount of carbohydrates. That's what you're going to see. You're going to see detriments in performance. Right? Now, when we look at duration, you're going to start to see things change. Now, why is that? Because the longer you go, your body's going to start to slow down. You just can't help it, right? And so once you burn through, like, look at the amount of carbs that you were burning. Well, what happens is you're dropping, right? You know, if you're not taking in enough carbs during the time that you're working out, your carbohydrate stores, you know, so your glucose and glycogen, they're going down. So what does your body do? Your body compensates on its own and says, look, let's start mobilizing and oxidating and utilizing fat, rephosphorylizing more fat for energy, because this person keeps running minute after minute. Now, again, what will happen during this is you will notice that you'll get slower and slower from minute to minute to minute, and your body's gonna have to burn more fat to compensate, just to keep you going, okay? So low intensity exercise is really what the fat burning zone is on your cardio equipment, okay? You know, so you'll usually see cardio zone and then fat burning. What this means is in the cardio zone, you're really pushing yourself. Again, you're going to see more changes cardiovascularly because you're really taxing that system and really pushing it more. But again, you're going to be burning more carbohydrates versus at the lower intensity with the lower heart rate, respiratory exchange ratio, right? You're in that one, your body can somewhat, I don't want to say relax because you're still going to work, but it relaxes somewhat, switches to a different fuel source, you know, switches gears, and is able to go from burning more fats to then utilizing more, burning more carbohydrates to being able to burn more fats so that you can be able to exercise for longer duration and not burn through all your carbohydrates and be able to spare some of those, especially, you know, if you're somebody who does a lot of training throughout the day, your body may intuitively know, like, hey, we need carbs for other trains. So again, that's part of the training that gets your body to be able to switch through systems at faster rates. And it goes vice versa too. You know, power athletes are able to, you know, basically not completely skip the slow twitch muscle fibers, but be able to kind of really get into your fast twitch fibers at a much faster rate with the power movements they do. Okay, and so it works in both directions. So RER is lower than during high intense exercise. Percentage of energy will be derived from fat is much higher, and the total amount of energy expended is lower. So that's what you gotta understand. You may be burning more fat at the time of, but you're not burning as much energy, right? So not necessary to burn fat during exercise to lose body fat, right? So again, you know, if you want to do high intensity interval training stuff and you're burning mostly carbohydrates, you're going to burn the fat at different times. It's not during the actual exercise time. You're not going to be burning, you're going to be burning mostly carbohydrates, not necessarily as much fat, but at times of rest, because you're in a deficit, that's where the fat's going to be pulled from the tissue and utilized for energy. Right? So again, general adaptations of training on fat usage: fatty acids are more easily mobilized as you train more. So again, like I said, you'll be able to move from the because your body's used to doing it. It doesn't happen first time you go running for long distance, because one, you probably won't make it very long, so then you know you're gonna be burning most of the carbs during that time, and it's gonna feel more high intense because your body just can't keep up. Now once you're more trained and more trained, you see the shift, so that take up fatty acids and muscle cells will get enhanced, and number and size of mitochondria will be increased in your slow twitch muscles, right? So you'll be more oxidative. High fat diet, endurance performance, dun, 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 will not likely improve. You need carbohydrates, because when you perform at high rates, when you're competing, like I said, you're burning carbs, not fats. Intensity of exercise would be too low to be competitive, right? You know, I see all kinds of wild stuff that people post that, you know, especially they're just huge keto fans. And I'm sorry, but your top distance athletes in the world, they eat carbohydrates. They utilize carbohydrates. Okay, that's, you know, and even now there's some keto athletes. What they do prior to the competitions coming up, guess what they load up on? Even though they're keto, they train most of the time keto. But then when comp comes, they start carbo loading, right? The keto's not helping them. They realize they've got a carbo load, but then they go back to the keto, which to me, you know, is a little strange, because they're not during the times where they can really be pushing themselves or some of their training workouts leading up to that. They'd be better off having that fuel to let themselves push themselves even more, but they don't do that. Again, you don't see them winning the marathons, right? Effects of caffeine on fat usage, 5 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. They're getting some more. Maybe even a little bit more. And does not increase the fat mobilization. Tastes good though. Central nervous system stimulant, increases sense of awareness, decreases perceived effort. Well, I'm going to go right here a little bit, so I don't want to feel like it's killing me. It can be banned substance in certain dosage. Again, you know, athletes got to look at how much they can have. Normal use is not likely to exceed thresholds, and caffeine is addictive and has side effects. I don't know what the side effects are, but all right. Carnitine dietary supplements found in food synthesized from lysine. Deficiencies are rare. Supplement doses 2 to 4 grams a day. Supplements seem to be safe at such dosage. Little evidence of any effectiveness by supplementing it in. Again, you'll see in a lot of energy drinks a lot of L-carnitine, and it's supposed to help mobilize more fat usage. There's nothing showing that by adding more of it into your diet or supplementing it that way, it really has any effect on the fat mobilization any more than just, you know, getting it normally. So I'm not saying that it doesn't. There's not any scientific evidence really proving it. Like I said, you know, maybe we're not giving the right dosage, or maybe we're not being able to measure things as well. You know, that could be part of it. Or again, maybe it just really doesn't. So if you want to take it, you know, seems to be safe at those dosages. So from a safety standpoint, that's fine. Again, are you going to be getting your money's worth? Not a lot of evidence is going to back that up. Okay. Medium chain triglyceride supplements, not effective for improving endurance performance. Also may impair performance in some cases, so not really something you want to take. Fat recommendations for athletes, total energy needs. So, you know, you can help make up the energy needs, right? So you need a certain amount of carbs, you need a certain amount of protein, you also need a certain amount of fat intake. So again, severe restrictions not recommended. Again, when we talk about percentage of total energy intake, anywhere from 20 to 35%. Again, you know, you're gonna have to mix that with the amount of carbs and protein. So if you need higher amounts of carbs and protein based on the type of training you do, you'll probably have a lower percentage, closer to like the 20% versus 35, because of the amount of protein you're intaking, right? Again, can be expressed on a gram per kilogram of body weight basis. You know, so 1 gram per kilogram daily, or, you know, however much you want. can go as high as 3 grams per kilogram. And ultra endurance athletes, again, with the ultra endurance athletes, you got to realize that these folks are really pacing themselves. Again, they're going to use a lot of carbohydrates too, so they've got to have a good mix. You know, in times of races, their carb and fat intake is going to be a bit more, you know, leading up to the race, so probably be a bit more important than maybe, you know, I don't want to say it's, you know, the protein intake's not important. Really, leading up to the race, the big thing is to really increase their total calories so that they can get a good percentage of all three. Adjusting fat intake to achieve energy deficits. So you got to reduce body fat. What you got to do is you've got to make sure that you're exceeding your caloric needs, right? So you've got to have higher caloric output versus lower caloric input. And sometimes reducing body fat in athletes is going to result in improved performance, but not always. And so you got to be careful with that because, and I'm being careful with the way I say that because a lot of times you get, you know, especially we've seen this in the female triad with female distance athletes, particularly runners. They get so competitive with their times, and they think, man, maybe I just got too much body fat. I got to get skinnier. I got to get skinnier. The problem is when they get, you know, they start reducing their food too much, they start to also take amino acids away from their muscles. And again, even though they're losing weight and things like that, once their body fat gets too low, there's detriments, right? And there's some permanent detriments that can happen that can have long-term health effects. And so you've got to be really careful with adjusting not only the fat intake, but just their total calorie intake. You know, and making sure that you're still getting enough calories to train and perform, and that you also have a good healthy fat percentage on your body, you know, for best performance as well. Okay. Fat intake is typically reduced since reductions of carbohydrate or protein intakes may be detrimental to performance. Again, you know, I mean, you can't drop below a certain threshold of fat percentage, you know, especially athletes, you know. Non-athletes, you know, maybe, you know, a lot of times you may have a dietitian say, oh yeah, you know, just try to stay around 10% of your total calories as fat. Athletes, we tend to want them to have a bit more percentage-wise, but definitely you don't want to drop below that 10% by any means. Okay? And athletes may consume a short-term low-fat diet to achieve body comp goals. Again, this happens, you know, especially in fighting sports or like bodybuilding and things like that. Again, it's not the, you know, not always, it's not the healthiest, safest thing to do, but being that there's certain weight goals and things like that, and it tends to help with how, you know, like whether it's bodybuilding, the way that you look, you know, it's a fast way to do it. It's a convenient way to do it. So it's practiced a lot in fighting sports because everybody fights at a lower weight. You know, so something that we kind of live with in those type of sports based on the way that things are regulated and done. There are healthier ways to do that. Even, you know, it's one of those things in general for performance and everything else. Is it the most healthy thing to do? No, but there are healthier ways of doing something that's somewhat unhealthy, I guess. Again, if you ever get a chance to look over things that have been written and done by Dr. Peacock over at Nova, he's got some fascinating stuff on weight reduction with fighting athletes. Fat intake of a bodybuilder will vary depending on their training size. So, bulking up, are they cutting down? Acute and chronic fat and energy deficits. So acute would be trying to cut everything down so you can make weight. Chronic is maintaining a low body fat percentage. Again, there's a healthy low and then there's a low. And again, fat phobia is a term. You know, people get afraid of having body fat. And some of that can be slightly healthy, you know, of not wanting to have it, but again, a fear of it, an obsession of it, you know, constantly consumed by it. Those things are definitely not healthy. Okay? So fat recommendations for athletes, again, effects of inadequate fat intake on training performance and health. Inadequate replenishment of intermuscular fat stores can be detrimental. Inability to manufacture sex-related hormones. Again, if you don't have enough fat on there, you know, your progesterone, testosterone, you know, all those different sex-related hormones can get, you know, can be in low levels, which then can also be detrimental to your performance and your goals as well. Okay. Decline in high density lipoprotein cholesterols, which are your good cholesterols that you want, and an inadequate fat soluble vitamin intake, right? Because the fat soluble vitamins are transported with the fat, they're stored with the fat, and you can't do that. You may not have enough of those vitamins to pull from, right? So we can see that happen as well. Okay. Again, we'll kind of skip the my pyramids since that's outdated. So translating fat recommendations to food choices, amounts and types of fats in foods. So if we're looking at the fatty foods, predominantly we'd like to see people eat more of the oils. Again, avocados are a good source of good fats. Nuts are a good source of good fats. Again, you've got to balance that with calorie intakes, you know, if you're trying to maintain or lose weight. Corn, soy, flaxseed are mostly polyunsaturated, safflower oil, liquid and soft tub margarines, mayonnaise and some salad dressings, sunflower, pumpkin, flax seeds are all polyunsaturated. Predominantly saturated baking grease, lard, hard stiff butter, margarine or butter, cream, coconut oil. Like you said, I don't know why this is one of those overused items nowadays, but it is. Again, here's a table, kind of shows you the amount of energy, the amount of fat in each one, and whether it's mostly monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, or saturated. You guys can look over these slides more in depth. Well, you know. Now, Oreo cookie ice cream. I love Oreos. 6 cookies. Total fat 14 grams. A lot of calories, 318 for 6 cookies. Man, I wish they could figure out a way to make Oreos 0 calories. I'd eat those all day. But yeah, they just haven't figured that one out yet. All right. Okay. So fat recommendations to food choices. So fat in the typical American diet, traditional American diet, tends to be very high in fats. Traditional ethnic diets tend to be low in fats. Traditional American diet tends to be too high in fat and too low in carbohydrates for athletes. Now, again, I think that, you know, in America and trends and things, you know, there's so many different eating trends going on right now. I don't know, you know, especially, you know, keto seems to be pretty popular in America. So I don't know that, you know, what they've written in this book is typically, you know, completely off in that regard of full of carbs. But again, depends on where you live and what the you know, like what's fashionable, I guess, in the area that you live at. You know, some areas still have higher fat. Some areas have higher carbs. Really depends. All right. And again, Americanization of traditional ethnic foods. So again, we take a lot of foods from different countries and we Americanize them, so to speak, is what they're saying. And so we add a lot more fat to what the traditional dishes. Addition of the sour cream there. Again, in the sauce, maybe there's even more added fat to it as well. All right. Again, here's burger meals and the amount of kilocalories per meal and the amount from fats, right? So if you look at the quarter pounder versus the Big Mac, quarter pounder has less fat, less calories. Again, the French fries, you know, I wish I'd have kept at least one thing like constant, like large fry in all of them and medium fry in all of them, so you can kind of see the difference between burgers mostly. But yeah, your food choices, right? So again, you know, one of the things is you can order smaller food choices, so the size of it. Now again, you may still feel hungry after that, but you can see how you can reduce from having a Big Mac and large fry to a cheeseburger and a small French fry, and you cut your energy intake by half, right? And you've almost, you know, again, depending on what you drink with that might counteract that. You know, you get the, you know, the 84-ounce Coca-Cola or something like that because of the amount of sugar that's going to be in that can counterbalance some of that. But, you know, I mean, it just depends, right? So again, smaller size meals. Again, there's, you know, certain, you know, pound for pound, maybe you can order something else, you know, like when we go through there that may be more filling. Like I know for me, a small cheeseburger and small fry is kind of going to feel very filling. So I can maybe substitute something bigger with less calories, you know. So again, you know, smaller size is one way to go. Different foods is another way to go. Again, things we can do is reduce portion size, prepare foods with less. And there's a lot of fat-free or low-fat ingredients you can put in foods. Be aware of hidden fats that are in foods as well. You know, a lot of times you may think, oh yeah, that's not really fat in food, and you know, I don't really get the whole thing with, you know, people don't really think about that when they're cooking with cooking oil, which I don't understand that, but it is what it is. Consume lower fat cuts of meat, poultry, low fat or non-dairy. So again, you know, one of the things I cooked steak the other day, I cooked it with the fat in, add a little bit of the flavor, but then before I consume it, I cut all the fat off of it. Now again, you could cut the fat off before, which will lower it even more. You know, again, when you get dairy products, you can get low fat or non-fat. Choose lower fat versions of high fat processed foods, substitute fruits and vegetables for fat containing snacks. There's a lot of different ways that you can lower your fat intake. That's what it's doing. Okay. Grilling and steaming are preparation methods that don't require additional fats. You know, so when you fry foods, yeah, we usually add more oils and things that have fat in them. Okay. Again, beverages. So again, you see a lot of that. You know, you go to Starbucks and you add the whipped cream and all that. Again, you know, you can order the non-fat mocha, whatever, or low fat and all that, and that'll do some of it. But again, I don't know if they have a no fat or low fat whipped cream. I don't, you know, I like my coffee. I make my coffee at home. I don't really go by the fancy coffee drinks, so I don't know if they have a no fat or low fat whipped cream option with that. I have no idea. Not my. All right. Fat substitutes are often made from carbohydrate sources. So again, one of the things is to increase the flavor, they'll add, you know, like more sugar, carbs, or things like that. Now, again, it's still being made, you know, what you want to look at with that is, are they having to add so much that so it says low fat, well, the calories could be the same because they had the double or triple amount of carbs. But a lot of times when things, you know, like if you look at things where they do low fat and they add a little bit extra carbs to something, usually you'll still see the total calories come down because if they go gram for gram, well, yeah, you know, fats gram for gram are twice the amount of calories or over twice the amount of calories in carbohydrates. So again, watching your weight, that may be a good option, okay? But then you got to look at that, right? So just because something says fat-free or fat, you know, it's lower fat, look at the total calories between the two products, right? Because whatever they added in, right? Olestra or Olean, then you'll see that as a substitute in the way they cook some chips and things like that. I don't know if I've seen that. I think there's still chips that are cooked that way. You guys will have to let me know if you buy any chips that have Olestra in. I remember the Lay's used to have some that had that in. I don't know if they still do. It's basically not absorbed. It's not. I don't know if they still cook stuff in Olean or not. fat blockers. All right, so there's some things that basically what it does is it's supposed to help block the amount of food when you eat. I remember there was a product, like I believe it was Ally, if I remember correctly. Um, I remember on the actual product, because what it does is because you don't digest the fat, it adds bulk to going through your colon and everything because you're not absorbing as much. And so one of the side effects of it is you may have more frequent urges to have to go expel number two, right? And I remember on the product, I'm reading this product, and I'm waiting in line to pick up a prescription. And I picked up the box, and I look on the back of the pop. It says side effect is, you may have increased like urges to go number two, or you may have diarrhea or something along those effects, or both. And it said to carry a second pair of underwear and pants. And I'm thinking, okay, for the fat loss and what you're about to do to yourself, is it really worth basically not having the ability to get from where you're at to a bathroom fast enough that you've got to then carry a second pair of pants and underwear and then carry some type of bag that you can close up to put your other clothes? I mean, unless I guess you're not going to wash those and you're just okay with going through clothes and throwing them away. I have no idea. But again, they're not that effective as an aid to weight loss. Caloric deficit, increasing energy expenditure is a much better alternative. So again, to summarize, precise terminology is important to prevent confusion when you discuss in several contexts, including the effect they may have on performance and health. They are an important source of energy at rest and during low intensity exercise. You've got to have them, right? So don't cut them out. Fat absorption, digestion, transportation, metabolism are slow and complicated when compared to carbohydrates. For athletes in training to need to balance both carbs, protein, and fat, intake results in diet that is typically lower in fat than that of the general population, because the greater need for carbs. In all honesty, I think what it is, I honestly think general population needs to be more. Two, I think if they follow the same percentage principles as athletes, that's really a better way to go. What they need to look at doing is, an athlete may eat 6,000 calories, general pop person might be eating like 1,700 calories, right? But the percentages really should be about the same, for, top performance at whatever you do, okay? Fats and foods contribute to their good taste, and it's easy to consume excess fats and kilocalories because they're delicious, right? So that's the fats chapter. If you guys have questions, again, we'll have a Kaiser Live to go over this stuff. So please go over these before we get into those, and we'll discuss those things as they come up, all right? Out of here. I'll stop recording.